It brings indescribable sadness to know contributed significantly to her fear, paranoia, and isolation.
The day began like any other within Buckingham Palace's storied walls. But just 7 minutes ago, something shattered that quiet rhythm. A sudden tragic announcement sent shockwaves through the royal corridors, freezing staff mid-step and silencing centuries-old rituals. It wasn't a minor change or a routine update. This was different. This was seismic. For the first time in decades, uncertainty clung to the monarchy's future like a gathering storm. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Inside the palace, even the smallest details betrayed a sense of unrest. Palace staff, usually accustomed to the rhythmic flow of royal life, noticed early signs that something extraordinary was unfolding. The phones, normally busy but manageable, rang incessantly as aides relayed urgent messages. Senior advisors moved swiftly between chambers, their faces tight with unspoken concern, their conversations reduced to hurried whispers. These were not the routine logistical adjustments of a royal day. They were signs of an internal upheaval building beneath the surface. Outside, the first clues emerged in the form of sleek black cars arriving unusually early. Their tinted windows concealed figures carrying sealed envelopes, symbols of high-level discussions, constitutional considerations, or, as some suspected, an emergency directive from the king himself. Couriers moved with precision, delivering their packages before vanishing as quickly as they had appeared. The palace gates, normally a place of serene ceremony, became a revolving door for the kingdom's most powerful insiders. Observers with long memories recalled similar patterns during past royal crises and whispered, almost fearfully, that history might be preparing to repeat itself. Then came the balcony. Known around the world as the monarchy's most enduring symbol of continuity, it remained eerily deserted. Normally, in the early hours, staff would be seen inspecting its structure or arranging routine details in preparation for upcoming appearances. But no figure appeared that day. The emptiness of that balcony sent a chill through those who know how carefully every royal ritual is maintained. In the royal world, silence can speak louder than any proclamation, and that silence now hangs over Buckingham like an approaching storm. Long-serving palace workers, whose instincts have been sharpened by decades of witnessing history from behind gilded doors, began exchanging uneasy glances. Many admitted later that they hadn't felt this level of tension since the days surrounding Queen Elizabeth II's passing. There was something about the rhythm of the palace, the quickened steps, the quiet urgency, the deliberate absence of the familiar that signaled something far greater than a scheduling change. They could feel the weight of an unspoken truth. Meanwhile, the media stationed outside caught on to these subtle shifts with practiced eyes. Security teams adjusted their patterns, clearing areas they normally ignored. Scheduled public engagements disappeared from official timetables without explanation. Rumors began to move through the crowd like sparks catching dry kindling. Veteran royal correspondents compared notes and quickly agreed. Something significant, perhaps historic, was underway. It wasn't a question of if an announcement was coming, it was a matter of when and how devastating its impact would be. In the midst of this quiet chaos, a chilling realization began to take hold among those closest to the institution. The movements were too coordinated, the absences too deliberate, the silence too thick. This was not the unfolding of an ordinary day. This was the early tremor before a seismic royal shift. Whispers spread rapidly through corridors and press rooms alike. A monumental decision was on the brink of breaking. And when it did, the monarchy's path would never look the same again. But the silence didn't last long. Behind closed doors, whispers turned into strategic moves, and the first hints of the king's stunning decision began to emerge. Witnesses say King Charles appeared earlier than usual, but avoided photographers, speaking to no one. His normally warm nods were replaced by distant stares, his steps slower, almost burdened. For weeks, rumors had circled about his state of mind and growing internal pressures. But this morning, those whispers took shape. The monarch had withdrawn deep into the palace's private wing, a move insiders say only happens before history-altering declarations. Within the palace, his abrupt change in routine set off quiet alarms among those who understand the language of royal behavior. Normally, the king begins his day with well-established public gestures, a brief wave to staff, a few carefully chosen words to photographers, a measured display of stability that reassures both insiders and observers alike. But not today. Charles bypassed every familiar stop, striding past aides and security without a single acknowledgement, heading straight toward a secluded chamber near the picture gallery. Those who witnessed it described not the confident gait of a monarch at work, but the deliberate, heavy steps of a man carrying something far greater than the duties of the day. Close aides were summoned urgently, their movements sharp and uncharacteristically tense. These were not routine morning briefings. One by one, senior advisors disappeared into the king's quarters, their faces grave, their conversations reduced to hushed exchanges in corridor corners. A select few clutched thick archival folders, the kind used only in matters of constitutional weight or succession planning. For staff members watching from the periphery, this was a chilling sign. Whenever the past is brought out in ink and parchment, it is because the future is being rewritten. Inside his private rooms, Charles remained isolated for hours. Sources later described him as reflective, withdrawn, pacing slowly, then pausing to stare at documents spread before him. It was as though he was silently rehearsing a decision he could no longer postpone. For months, whispers about his health and emotional strain had been dismissed as idle chatter. But on this morning, his isolation felt deliberate, almost ceremonial, a preparation for something irreversible. Even his private secretary was not called immediately. Those who know him best understood that this was the king's way of confronting a burden alone before allowing the machinery of monarchy to set it in motion. Adding to the growing unease was Queen Camilla's sudden absence from all public-facing duties. There were no statements, no alternative engagements, no plausible explanations. Her silence became a story of its own. For a figure who has carefully built her presence alongside Charles, her withdrawal at such a critical moment raised more questions than answers. Was she stepping back by choice, or had the inner circle decided her presence might complicate what was unfolding? No one outside that private wing knew, and that uncertainty only deepened the sense of something monumental brewing behind closed doors. Senior courtiers, normally the calm custodians of royal routine, struggled to mask their unease. Some were spotted exchanging terse whispers, others moving through corridors with documents pressed tightly to their chests, as if shielding the contents from curious eyes. Rumors began to ripple through staff communication channels with increasing intensity. One phrase, repeated in hushed tones, sent shivers through the ranks. Something's being drafted, something final. In the palace, those words carry a weight all their own. They speak not of minor adjustments, but of declarations that alter the shape of history. As hours passed, the king's retreat took on the air of an inflection point, a moment when the future was being quietly decided by a solitary figure behind ancient doors. And as Charles withdrew further from public view, another royal figure quietly began to step forward, signaling a generational shift that no one was supposed to notice yet. In the king's absence, two familiar figures emerged. Prince William and Princess Catherine arrived at the palace far earlier than scheduled, their expressions serious, their pace deliberate. Gone were the warm smiles and easy gestures the public knew so well. This was the look of heirs stepping into uncharted territory. The corridors stirred, with quiet acknowledgement power it seemed, was shifting faster than anyone had anticipated. William's entrance set the tone. Those who saw him noted a striking focus, an intensity rarely witnessed outside of major state occasions. He carried a set of briefing papers close to his chest, moving with purpose toward the inner corridors. This was not the casual arrival of a royal fulfilling daily engagements. This was the calculated stride of a man aware that the balance of authority was quietly tilting in his direction. For months, whispers had circulated about his growing role behind the scenes, but on this day, those whispers crystallized into undeniable reality. Moments later, Catherine followed. Her demeanor, as always, carried grace, But beneath that calm exterior was unmistakable steel. She greeted staff with brief, composed nods, exuding both reassurance and quiet strength. Her presence alone seemed to steady the atmosphere, reminding everyone of the couple's increasingly central role in shaping the monarchy's future. Together, their arrival sent a clear signal. The next generation was no longer waiting in the wings. They were stepping onto the main stage. Their destination left no room for doubt. Both William and Catherine made their way directly to the same secure meeting room where King Charles had secluded himself earlier. No press access, no leaks. Only a tightly controlled circle of advisors was permitted inside. Whatever conversations unfolded in that room were meant to remain behind sealed doors, but palace insiders could feel the gravity. This was the convergence point between a waning reign and an emerging force. Senior advisors, who had spent years orbiting Charles's inner circle, began subtly redirecting communication lines away from Clarence House toward Kensington Palace. This was more than a procedural shift, it was symbolic. Information, influence, and strategic coordination were quietly flowing toward the younger couple. It wasn't done with ceremony, but with careful precision, as if the palace itself was instinctively reorienting toward its future power base. Those watching closely recognized the significance of these quiet adjustments. They signaled a new operational center forming in real time. Amid this subtle realignment, one initiative rose to prominence: the Diana Initiative. Long discussed behind closed doors, it represented more than just charity. It was a vision, a strategic merging of the monarchy's emotional legacy with modern leadership. By reviving the values that defined Princess Diana's connection to the public: empathy, accessibility, and moral courage, William and Catherine were positioning themselves not merely as successors, but as reformers ready to carry the crown into a new era. Palace staff began to speak of it not as an idea, but as an inevitability. Insiders whispered that the couple was preparing for the storm ahead. They weren't waiting for formal announcements. They were building the framework for a monarchy that could withstand whatever revelations the king's withdrawal would soon unleash. Every meeting they held, every decision they made, carried the weight of foresight and a recognition that the coming days would define their roles for decades to come. But while the younger royals organized their approach, the king's private discussions took on a much darker and more decisive tone. As the palace slept, a midnight meeting unfolded in the king's private study. Only a handful of the most trusted figures were present. Those inside described the atmosphere as unlike anything in recent memory. In hushed tones, King Charles began to speak not as a monarch issuing commands, but as a man confronting his limits. What followed wasn't a discussion, it was a confession, one that would reshape the monarchy forever. Behind the locked doors of his private chamber, the king addressed a select circle: senior advisors, constitutional aides, and Prince William. These were the individuals who had stood beside him through transitions, crises, and coronations, yet even they sensed this night was different. There was a solemnity to Charles's presence, a weight in his words that stripped away the regal veneer and revealed something far more human. A man facing the limits of power, time, and legacy. He began by speaking slowly, acknowledging what many had whispered but few dared articulate. He spoke of the weight of centuries, pressing upon his shoulders, a burden that had grown heavier with every passing month of his reign. His health, though carefully guarded from public scrutiny, had become an unspoken factor within palace walls. For a man raised to embody continuity, the creeping realization that his own endurance might not match the expectations of the crown cut deeply. His voice, usually composed and measured, carried a rare tremor that held the room in absolute silence. Then, in a moment that shifted the tone entirely, Charles revealed that this gathering was not spontaneous. For months, he had been quietly working on a contingency plan, one that involved significant constitutional adjustments designed to safeguard the monarchy's stability. This was not about ceremonial gestures, it was about structural change. Those present were stunned to learn that the framework for this transition was not a recent idea, born of panic, but a carefully considered path he had been building in the shadows. His confession deepened as he expressed his greatest fear, that without swift and deliberate action, the monarchy might fracture under the weight of modern pressures, internal divides, and generational shifts. The institution he had spent his life defending, modernizing, and preserving could falter if leadership did not adapt with precision. His words carried both urgency and sorrow, as though he were acknowledging that his reign might ultimately be defined not by what he achieved, but by what he chose to let go. Then came the sentence that chilled the room. He paused, looked at those gathered, and said, "The future may not have me in it." The impact was immediate. Advisors shifted uneasily. William held his composure, but the magnitude of what his father was implying was unmistakable. This wasn't a symbolic statement. It was an acknowledgement of an impending reality. The king was not merely planning for the future, he was preparing to step aside in a way no one had anticipated so soon. Before the meeting ended, the outline of the plan was set. Plans for an unprecedented royal broadcast were finalized. It would be a direct address from the monarch to the nation and the world, unlike anything in living memory. Every word, every gesture, would carry enormous historical weight. The message had to be clear, decisive, and unshakable. By the time the discussion concluded, those inside knew the countdown had begun. But before dawn broke, not everyone inside the palace agreed on the king's course of action, and some were prepared to resist. Queen Camilla's unexplained disappearance from the day's events sent ripples through the palace. But one figure refused to retreat into the shadows: Princess Anne. Known for her unshakable duty, Anne began attending closed meetings uninvited, pressing advisors for clarity. Behind her calm exterior was a brewing storm. She had no intention of allowing the monarchy's foundations to be rewritten without a fight. Camilla's absence was no mere scheduling anomaly. She quietly withdrew from multiple engagements without offering a formal explanation, leaving both the public and the palace to speculate. There were no substitute appearances, no carefully worded press statements, and no attempts to fill the gap her absence created. For someone who had spent years meticulously crafting her public presence, this sudden silence was deafening. Her retreat spawned a wave of speculation that reached every corner of royal life. It wasn't just a missed appearance. It was a vanishing act at the most critical moment in the monarchy's modern history. Her allies, once confident fixtures in palace communications, found themselves sidelined. Media coverage that typically highlighted Camilla's charitable engagements and soft power influence began to fade. Stories that once subtly reinforced her role as queen consort were replaced by narratives focused on William, Catherine, and the emerging future of the monarchy. This shift wasn't coincidental. Within royal circles, coverage patterns are often deliberate signals of power dynamics. Camilla's diminishing visibility suggested an internal recalibration, one that didn't favor her. Amid this quiet power vacuum, Princess Anne made her move. Normally content to operate within well-defined boundaries, Anne began appearing in key closed-door discussions uninvited. Her presence was neither loud nor theatrical. It was deliberate, calculated, and commanding. Advisors, accustomed to her quiet efficiency, found themselves fielding pointed questions about the king's contingency plans and the pace of constitutional changes. Anne's tone carried the authority of someone who had spent her entire life safeguarding the monarchy's core traditions. She was not there to observe. She was there to make it clear that this sudden acceleration of change would not go unchallenged. Even in public, Anne's gestures became unmistakable. At formal ceremonies, where every movement is choreographed to signal unity, she made subtle but firm choices that spoke volumes. Courtiers noticed her withholding the small, customary gestures of deference that usually reinforced Camilla's presence. These weren't overt acts of defiance but quiet signals of disapproval, visible only to those who understood royal language. They were the actions of a woman who had spent decades observing palace politics and who now chose her moment to intervene. The tension between Anne and Camilla had deep roots. It wasn't born overnight. Their relationship stretched back to the complicated dynamics of the 1970 seconds, evolving through years of polite distance and mutual calculation. While Camilla rose through the ranks, reshaping her public image with patience and resilience, Anne remained the monarchy's unwavering pillar, a woman who had built her reputation not on charm or reinvention, but on relentless duty. That contrast had always been there, simmering beneath the surface. But now, with Camilla's sudden withdrawal and Charles's unprecedented decisions looming, those quiet rivalries resurfaced with sharpened edges. Anne's involvement added an unexpected twist to the unfolding royal drama. She embodied tradition, stability, and continuity qualities that stood in stark contrast to the rapid changes being set in motion by Charles and quietly embraced by William and Catherine. Her presence in these discussions served as a reminder that the monarchy was not a single voice, but a constellation of power centers, each with its own vision for the institution's survival. By inserting herself into the heart of the decision-making process, Anne became the traditionalist counterweight to Charles's modernizing impulse, ensuring that his plans would not go unexamined. As the palace divided between caution and change, outside its gates, the world began to sense that something historic was approaching. By the time the sun rose over London, speculation had exploded. News vans surrounded Buckingham Palace. Journalists pieced together fragments of insider whispers. Social media was ablaze with theories. Abdication? A regency? A constitutional crisis? It didn't matter that no one had official answers yet. What mattered was the magnitude of silence. And in that silence, the world realized the monarchy, as we know it, was standing on the edge of something irreversible. From the early hours, the palace gates transformed into a global epicenter of attention. International media outlets launched non-stop coverage, broadcasting live from every possible vantage point. The airwaves were saturated with urgent headlines and somber speculation. Reporters spoke of unprecedented developments and historic tremors, their voices tinged with the same unease that had seeped through the palace walls. This wasn't the typical frenzy surrounding a royal wedding or state occasion. This was something different, something far more consequential. Online, the speculation reached a fever pitch. Hashtags like #RoyalCrisis and #Future of the Crown began trending across continents. Every rumor, every subtle movement within the palace grounds was dissected, magnified, and debated by millions. From seasoned royal watchers to casual observers, everyone seemed to sense that history was tilting. The monarchy, usually so controlled and deliberate, had suddenly gone silent. And in that void, narratives were being written by those watching from the outside. Former palace insiders added to the intrigue, with cryptic interviews, choosing their words carefully, but hinting at something monumental. One described a planned but tragic revelation. Another spoke of a decision that's been building for months. Though none revealed specifics, their tone carried weight. These were individuals who had stood in corridors where history is whispered before it is spoken. Their choice to speak at all was enough to send waves of shock through an already restless public. Meanwhile, seasoned royal analysts began noting subtle but telling cues. The balcony appearances that usually signaled reassurance had been abruptly cancelled. The royal family's official social media accounts, normally quick to issue controlled statements in times of unrest, remained eerily silent. Even minor engagements were being postponed or quietly removed from public calendars. For an institution where every movement is choreographed, these quiet disruptions felt like thunder. Public debate intensified. Television panels and social media threads became arenas for clashing visions of the monarchy's future. Some argued passionately for modernization, claiming the institution must evolve to survive. Others clung to tradition, fearing that too much change too quickly could erode the very identity of the crown. It was no longer a private royal matter. It had become a national and global conversation. The silence from Buckingham Palace wasn't calming anyone. It was fanning the flames of speculation. Then came the tipping point. All eyes turned toward an unexpected announcement from palace officials. The king would address the nation that very afternoon. The timing was deliberate. The decision to speak directly, bypassing the usual layers of formality and ceremony, signaled the gravity of what was to come. Broadcasters across the world cleared their schedules. Commentators describe the moment as potentially epic-defining. Whatever the king said next would ripple far beyond the palace walls, reshaping not just the monarchy's present, but its future. And then, as the world held its breath, Buckingham Palace confirmed what everyone feared and hoped in equal measure. A live broadcast was imminent. At precisely 5 p.m., the palace issued a statement. King Charles would address the nation. Cameras locked on Buckingham's gates as the royal crest appeared on screens across the world. When Charles finally emerged, there was no fanfare, no carriage, no trumpets, just a solemn monarch facing history. His voice, steady yet fragile, carried the weight of centuries. What he revealed was not a mere update. It was the beginning of the monarchy's most dramatic transition in living memory. The air around the announcement carried a sense of finality. For days, silence and speculation had built like a storm gathering at the palace gates. Now, in a moment that would be replayed for generations, King Charles confirmed what many feared but few dared to articulate. His health, he explained, coupled with the rapidly changing world around him, had led him to a necessary but deeply tragic decision. Every word was measured, every pause carried emotion. The monarch was not just addressing his people, he was unveiling a seismic shift in the crown's future. Charles announced the formal initiation of a regency, effectively transferring major powers to Prince William. Though he retained his title as king, the day-to-day responsibilities and the constitutional weight of the throne would now rest with his son. It was a step no one had expected so soon. For a man who had waited a lifetime to ascend, this choice was both shocking and profoundly symbolic. His voice held steady, but those who knew him well sensed the weight of relinquishment behind his carefully chosen phrases. In his address, he tried to frame the decision as more than personal. He called it not an end, but a renewal. He spoke of the monarchy's ability to adapt, to bend without breaking, to endure through changing eras. Yet, even as he delivered these words, his eyes revealed a quiet sorrow, the unmistakable pain of a man who had realized that the future might unfold without him at its center. This wasn't just a transition of power. It was a deeply human moment in which the monarch stepped back to let history move forward. Charles didn't shy away from difficult truths. In a rare display of vulnerability, he acknowledged mistakes of the past, recognizing the moments where the monarchy had faltered and failed to meet the expectations of its people. It was a confession few monarchs have ever dared to make publicly. He then urged the nation to rally behind the next generation, emphasizing that William and Catherine represented the hope and stability the future demanded. The words carried both grace and urgency, a father passing the torch to his heir not through ceremony, but through necessity. Yet one detail did not escape the public eye. Queen Camilla was notably absent from the broadcast. Her absence, unexplained and conspicuous, fueled an immediate wave of speculation. Was it an illness, disagreement, a silent acknowledgement of shifting power? Whatever the reason, her absence hung heavily over the moment, a symbol of deeper undercurrents within the royal family that had yet to fully surface. The speech ended not with grand declarations, but with a lingering silence. Charles paused, his gaze steady but heavy, allowing the weight of his words to settle over a nation and a watching world. That final moment, unspoken, raw, and deliberate, stunned viewers everywhere. It was the pause of a monarch, stepping away from the spotlight and into history. But the shock of the announcement was only the beginning. Behind the scenes, a new royal order was already forming. Within hours of the announcement, power began to shift like tectonic plates beneath the monarchy. William's team took control of key communications. Catherine's role expanded overnight, becoming the monarchy's face of compassion and modernity. Meanwhile, Camilla's camp found itself increasingly sidelined, their influence fading under the weight of a new narrative. The future wasn't coming, it had arrived. The transformation was swift and deliberate. Kensington Palace, once the secondary hub of royal operations, evolved into the monarchy's new strategic nerve center. Advisors, media liaisons, and senior aides redirected their focus, recognizing that the gravitational pull of power had changed. Messages that would once have flowed through Charles's private office were now channeled through William's team. Policy coordination, press strategy, and public engagements all began to orbit around the Prince and Princess of Wales. It wasn't merely administrative, it was symbolic. The monarchy had subtly re-centered itself without needing a formal proclamation. William wasted no time asserting his new role. He convened immediate briefings with military leaders, constitutional experts, and media strategists to ensure a seamless transition. These meetings weren't ceremonial. They were tactical. Behind the palace walls, William began laying out a vision for how the monarchy would operate under his stewardship, ensuring stability while signaling that this was not business as usual. Officials described the atmosphere as focused and decisive. The heir to the throne was no longer preparing for the future, he was actively shaping it. Catherine, meanwhile, emerged as the emotional anchor of this new era. Within hours of the regency announcement, she undertook a series of carefully chosen engagements designed to project empathy, unity, and continuity. Her words were calm yet inspiring, her presence steadying a nation grappling with unexpected change. For many, she represented the bridge between cherished royal traditions and the evolving values of a modern Britain. It was no coincidence that her role expanded at the precise moment the monarchy needed a unifying figure. Her grace and quiet strength offered a reassuring contrast to the uncertainty swirling around the institution. While William and Catherine rose to prominence, Camilla's influence dimmed with startling speed. Her portraits, once prominently displayed in key offices and ceremonial spaces, were quietly removed or relocated. It was a subtle but unmistakable signal her visibility was no longer central to the monarchy's narrative. Allies who had once championed her position found themselves on the periphery of decision-making. Her absence during the king's announcement now appeared less like a temporary withdrawal and more like the beginning of a long, deliberate eclipse. Amid this power realignment, Princess Anne stepped into a crucial role as an advisor, acting as the bridge between the old guard and the emerging leadership. Her steady hand reassured traditionalists who feared the pace of change. Anne's presence lent legitimacy to the transition, signaling that the monarchy was not abandoning its roots but carefully threading the past into the fabric of its future. Her support gave William's new leadership both moral weight and historical continuity. Then came the defining moment. The Diana Initiative, once a whispered project in palace corridors, was officially announced as the cornerstone of this new era. This initiative did more than honor the late princess's legacy. It strategically fused the emotional power of Diana's memory with the monarchy's future direction. By invoking her values, compassion, accessibility, and service, William and Catherine anchored their leadership in a legacy that commanded public devotion. It wasn't just a program, it was a declaration of intent. But even as the monarchy recalibrated, one question remained. Was this truly Charles's plan, or had destiny forced his hand? The dust had barely settled when commentators called it the most consequential decision of the modern monarchy. In one tragic yet visionary announcement, Charles had rewritten the royal playbook. Some saw courage, others saw inevitability, but all agreed the monarchy would never be the same. The king's final act wasn't merely about stepping back. It was about ensuring the crown survived in a world that no longer guaranteed reverence. In the days following the announcement, debates ignited across media, political circles, and royal households. Analysts dissected every word of the king's address, questioning whether this monumental step had been truly voluntary or a carefully orchestrated necessity forced by his health and mounting political realities. Some believed Charles had made a bold and selfless decision, choosing legacy over personal power. Others argued that he had been cornered by circumstance by the pressures of modern scrutiny, shifting public sentiment, and the relentless pace of change that even a monarch could not resist. Regardless of motive, the outcome was indisputable. The monarchy had entered uncharted territory. Public sentiment shifted with breathtaking speed. Support for William and Catherine soared to unprecedented levels, framing them as symbols of hope, renewal, and modernity. Their poised response to the regency, their ability to step forward without overshadowing the king, struck a chord with millions. For a public that had grown accustomed to seeing the monarchy as distant and ceremonial, the couple's emergence felt tangible, relatable, and deeply human. Commentators describe this moment as a rare convergence of tradition and transformation, a passing of influence not through pomp and pageantry, but through deliberate, emotionally resonant leadership. International reactions echoed the gravity of the moment. World leaders released statements acknowledging Charles's historic and dignified decision, framing it as a gesture of responsibility that transcended national boundaries. In diplomatic circles, the move was described as both stabilizing and forward-looking, a recognition that global monarchies must evolve to remain relevant. Charles, long seen as a transitional figure between eras, had ensured his final act carried the weight of history and the clarity of intent. But amid the praise and celebration, uncertainty lingered, particularly for Camilla. Her position, once carefully built through decades of endurance and public rehabilitation, now faced its most fragile moment. With her absence during the broadcast still unexplained, questions swirled about her future role in a monarchy that was rapidly reorganizing itself around William and Catherine. For someone who had worked so hard to carve out a place within the royal structure, this silent eclipse was both striking and symbolic. Through it all, Princess Anne stood firm as a stabilizing force. Her measured approach and quiet strength bridged the gap between those clinging to tradition and those embracing change. She became the unseen anchor of the transition, not dominating headlines, but ensuring the machinery of the crown continued to move with dignity and precision. In many ways, Anne represented the monarchy's ability to adapt without losing its core. Her role reaffirmed that even in upheaval, duty remained the constant. Historians quickly began to give this moment a name: the Twilight Transition. It captured the duality of what had occurred: a monarchy transformed without a coronation, reshaped not through ceremony, but through strategic withdrawal and generational realignment. It wasn't the loud, triumphant passing of an era. It was quiet, deliberate, and devastatingly human. This was not the end of a reign, but the redefinition of one. As Britain moves forward under a redefined royal structure, one truth remains. In those 7 minutes, history didn't just shift, it cracked open. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.